Yo, look, I know you guys are only here for like one thing only, and that is, well, where Deku was the brother of Mirko. I understand that, but I just gotta let you guys know one thing. And currently we sitting at like 5.7172 thousand subscribers. We're trying to hit 6K soon, and like revive the channel as well. So I'm going to try uploading more. And yeah, just be sure to hit like the like button, subscribe button, leave a comment, all that good stuff. And besides that, yeah, let's roll that intro. Rumi had grown up a troubled child, to say the very least. You see, at a young age, she ended up having to deal with the loss of her mother. Not only that, but she also had to deal with another woman being in her life, taking up the role of her mother as well. That woman's name would, of course, have been Inko Midoriya. She, for some reason, did not take her father's last name, Usugiyama, when it came on to marriage. And she obviously did not really like Inko that much, but she had to admit the woman was fairly nice. She always treated Rumi with respect and always trying to give the girl some space. She was kind hearted to a T, honestly, and Rumi felt bad for even disliking her, but she had to admit that nobody could replace her mother. Absolutely nobody. So for this woman, Inko, to just come into her life one day, take up the role of her mother, even marry her father, and next thing you know, she found out that they were having a kid, another kid. This just did not sit right with Rumi whatsoever. She would usually vent via going out into the streets, fighting people who even looked at her wrong. She would go on to try and fight them. And of course, with her powerful quirk, well, Rabbit, this made the fights even more devastating. The fact that she could kick with so much ferocity, so much force, so much strength, it basically made her a deadly weapon to many people. But things would change when she first met her little brother, Izuku. When she had first looked into Izuku's eyes, she immediately knew that he needed to be protected at all costs. She understood that she needed to be a better big sister. She promised to protect Izuku for as long as possible. She was going to make sure that he grew up to be strong like her as well. She was going to be a role model big sister for her little brother. He even had her ears as well. Well, albeit green instead of white like her own. But then again, his hair was green as well, mainly taking from Inko's side of the family. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter to her. It didn't matter if they were only half siblings instead of full-blooded brother and sister. At the end of the day, they were still siblings. And from that look in his eyes that day when she first saw him, Rumi was going to make a change in her life. She was going to make sure that she was going to be someone that her little brother could look up to. And that was what ended up leading her into the direction of wanting to become a hero as well. Over the years, some other kids would try to pick on Izuku for his bunny rabbit ears, mentioning how such a quirk wouldn't fit a hero whatsoever. They questioned how he would be able to become a hero with such a seemingly useless quirk. Oh, your quirk is that you have the physical capabilities of a rabbit? What's that supposed to do? How is that going to help you in a fight against villains? Sure, you might be able to jump higher than most, but like, what about the villains who got firepower and all that stuff? How are you going to compete with that? How are you going to save people? Basically, all these questions that people would usually be asking Izuku, mainly the boys to be honest. When it came on to the girls, they would be singing a very different tune though. When it came on to the girls in Izuku's class, they usually just liked to touch his ears due to just how soft they were, and they would usually coo him, talking about how he could be a great hero one day if he trained his quirk right. If he just continued on the right path, the right track, he could accomplish anything. The class was very conflicted as far as Izuku's quirk went, but despite the bullying that Izuku received from the boys, it wouldn't usually last very long, or it wouldn't go that far due to one constant factor throughout most of his life. And that was, of course, Rumi. Others would probably know her better as Mirko at this point, though. And that's what I'm going to be addressing her from now on as well. You see, Mirko, she was committed to being a great big sister to Izuku. It was to the point where she would usually end up being the one to defend him in fights as well. She would usually get straight down to the point. She would make sure that her name was well known throughout these schools that Izuku went to. She brought fear into the eyes, the hearts, I should say, of every single bully out there. Everybody would eventually know Mirko's name in the streets. Everybody would know that Mirko was somebody not to be messed around with. And the fact that she was related to this twerp Izuku, the fact that she was his older sister, yeah, over the years people would begin to understand that it was probably best not to pick on, well, Izuku. And it also helped that Izuku was also being trained by her as well. Usually Mirko would end up training her brother by, well, going down to some bar fights, sneaking in illegally, going into these bar fights, and, well, mollywopping most of these crowns. Sometimes they would get into street fights. They would usually get into a lot of fights, to be honest. But Izuku would quickly begin to master his quirk. He would begin to understand the intricacies, the great values that were held within this quirk, mainly coming from the high kicking speed, the amount of strength that came from his legs, his feet. All of that was basically part of his quirk. And of course, Izuku would also learn how to, well, kickbox, capoeira, or basically, I think, Brazilian dance combat, whatever you call it. Let me know in the comments if I'm even saying the right thing. Basically, Izuku would learn how to do many things revolving around his feet. He would have basically been like Sanji to an extent, mainly because of the fact that he usually used his feet more than his hands. It's not necessarily that he did not like to use his hands when it came on to fighting. It was literally just because his legs were just that much more powerful. It was to the point where Izuku had even had encounters with a boy by the name of Katsuki Bakugo. They were seen as the toughest kids in their class at this point. Izuku would have been around the age of 12 and Bakugo the same age. These two would have gone at it from time to time and, well, it would actually end up in a tie. Mainly because of how strong Bakugo's quirk was. But Izuku also had a mutation quirk. A very, very strong mutation quirk when you really think about it. Well, not a very strong mutation quirk. Mainly, he had trained his quirk up to an extent where he could use the best parts of it. The best capabilities of his quirk he was able to highlight most of the time when it came onto his fights, and this would especially be true against the likes of Bakugo. Izuku would have usually speed blitzed Bakugo most of the time, but Bakugo and his explosions, he was able to quickly come up with ideas in order to deal with Izuku. Bakugo was a fast thinker. He was quick on his feet when it came onto most of his fights, and he would usually improvise whenever it came onto having to deal with an opponent the likes of Izuku. Of course, Bakugo wasn't able to win every match, but neither was Izuku. Most of them would have ended up in drawers, but when it came onto some of these fights, that would have been another story. Mainly because of the fact that these guys would have improvised from the last fight and come up with something super intricate. Azuku would have usually used his feet to also create burrows, basically to kind of dig into, well, the ground. He would have actually been able to shatter the ground at times, and this would especially be after puberty hit. You see, after these guys hit puberty, for some reason, their strength just continued to evolve. Mirko was already known for being able to shatter concrete at this point in their life, and she was around 11 years older than Izuku. So there was a lot that she could teach him at this point, and the fact that she was also becoming a pro hero, that meant that although they had less time together, Mirko was still able to train Izuku very effectively, to the point where Izuku was able to do many things similar to Mirko at an even earlier age. Mirko admitted that she made a lot of mistakes when she was younger, and she probably was not the best influence for Izuku over the years, but she did try her best, and when it came on to quirk usage especially, Izuku was probably top in his class. The only one that could arguably be better than Izuku was, well, Bakugo, and that was simply due to the fact that he had an emitter type quirk, while Izuku, he had a mutation type quirk, and not necessarily one that was able to shoot projectiles either. No, this was purely physical, so what Izuku was able to do was very limited, but despite that limitation he was still able to make the best out of these situations, and be able to come out with a W in most fights as well. This, of course, being him hopping around like a rabbit, being able to sidestep, being able to jump on walls and all of that sort. This was what would be, well, most of Izuku's fighting style, basically building up momentum with most of his attacks. By the time Izuku was 15 years old, he and Bakugo would have been very fierce rivals, mainly because of the fact that Bakugo wanted to be top of the class. Izuku also wanted to be top of the class. He mainly wanted to be top of the class to actually compete with his sister. He basically adored his older sister. She was a pro hero. They had the same quirk, maybe like one or two differences, but for the most part they were the same. And, well, Izuku just saw it as an absolute win most of the time. The fact that he always had her as a form of emotional support, a very supportive person within his life. So Izuku wanted to repay his sister for all the good things that she did for him throughout the years by becoming a pro hero, the number one pro hero at that. He was shooting for the stars at this point in his life, and he knew that he was probably going to make it into UA. This was actually something the teacher had even mentioned before. One day the teacher had walked into the classroom, mentioning something about people needing to take their careers seriously, looking into careers for the future, before throwing the papers into the air, mentioning how many of them they just wanted to be pro heroes, to which most of the class would agree, and begin to celebrate by using their quirks. Izuku and Bakugo, they would simply be in the corner though, just watching the rest of the class. Izuku would have had his feet up watching the rest of the class, and he would have also been kind of relaxing as well with a smile on his face, but when it came on to Bakugo, he would have just kept a tight face, you could say, a stern looking face for the most part. The teacher would mention that the class needed to settle down, and it seemed as if there were a couple people from the class who had decided to partake in joining UA. This would have actually made most of the class pause, because, well, it's UA, the number one hero high school in all of Japan. What exactly do you mean by a couple of people? But then they began to think about it. and the teacher would confirm their suspicions by first calling out Bakugo, mentioning how he had applied for UA, and Bakugo would mention how, of course he did. He was going to be the only one to make it out of this rust bucket of a school. But then the teacher would also mention that, hey, it seemed as if Izuku Midori was also applying for UA. To which this would make Bakugo freeze, and he would just look and turn. He would just turn and look at Izuku, who had a cocky smile on his face. Bakugo would have been absolutely livid, but he would digress, knowing that this wasn't the best situation to involve himself in right now, such an open area especially, because Izuku could use his surroundings to, well, his advantage. The fact that it was such a small area meant that, well, Izuku could probably get a lot more kicks in. He could use the walls in order to actually help build up his momentum, and Bakugo would just end up looking like a fool in the end. So Bakugo would, of course, use this sense of reasoning to just simply sit down for now, although still having an angry look on his face. Izuku would just laugh, knowing that Bakugo couldn't really do anything in this situation. That would change though when it came on to a certain thug, you could say. You see, Izuku would have been walking home, and Bakugo would have been angry at the fact that Izuku decided to join UA, of course, but knowing that he couldn't do anything, he would just walk with his cronies for the most part. Izuku would be accompanied by some of the girls in his class who simply just wanted to feel his ears, his hair, maybe his tail as well. If he had one, that is. Yeah, Izuku would have mentioned before that he had thought about getting like a fake tail, but that might have actually been kind of overdoing it with the whole rabbit scheme, you could say, or well, aesthetic. Izuku would have been a rather popular kid, to say the very least, but in the end, things would change as everybody departed to go home. Izuku would have walked through a tunnel. This tunnel would have just so happened to have a sort of sludge villain pop out of it through like the sewer hole. And they would have mentioned that Izuku, he had a pretty nice physique. It seemed as if his legs were really strong. And he also noticed something. He had rabbit ears. 2 and 2 did not click though for the sludge villain. He just assumed that it was just a coincidence. And not only that, but well, probably he trained legs a lot. Just looking at how buff Izuku's legs were in comparison to most people. It was to the point where the muscles showed through their, well, pants. The sludge villain basically wanted to take over Izuku's body, and they would have let their intentions be known very early on. So of course the sludge villain would try to enter through Izuku's mouth, but the sewer lid would actually open once more, and this time a strong figure with blonde hair would actually appear through the manhole. He would reveal himself to be none other than All Might, and they would blast through the sludge villain. Izuku was trying to fend off against the sludge villain, but they would have just taken him off guard with how they tried to go through his mouth for some reason. That was an odd and filthy experience. Izuku never wanted to go through that again, but he thanked All Might for saving him. All Might would have mentioned that it was no problem whatsoever. It was all in their day's work, but Izuku would actually ask for an autograph. And All Might would question one thing though. Who was it possible that he was related to the pro hero Mirko? I mean, after all, but with what he was displaying, it seemed as if they had similar mutation quirks. They even looked alike as well, to an extent. Although, like Mirko, she had white hair and Izuku had green hair and freckles, the two of them were still on the more tan side. Izuku a little lighter than, well, Mirko though. In the end, Izuku revealed that yeah, Mirko was his older sister by like 11 years. All Might would be surprised, but he would simply chuckle, mentioning how these new generations of heroes always had something in store. They always had some secrets or just, well, anything interesting on their own side of life. He would chuckle once more and give Izuku back his notebook with his autograph on it. All Might would have also signed to Mirko just in case. And Izuku would honestly be honored. He would ask All Might one more question, that was if he had any advice on, well, training for the UA entrance exams, considering how, well, All Might had graduated from that school as well. And All Might would simply laugh before saying that, sure, he could give some advice. His advice would simply be to train hard. Train harder than last time. Make sure you never quit. Basically, try and come up with more creative ways in order to use your quirk, because at the end of the day, these villains will not care whether or not you are a good hero. They only care about how effective you are. It doesn't matter how flashy your quirk is. All that matters is the height. So as long as Izuku is really going to UA for the right reasons, if he really wanted to be a hero for the right reasons, All Might was going to be there to support him all the way. And although Izuku would have to try and train his, well, physical being a whole lot more, it wasn't like he was starting from ground zero in this timeline. No, Izuku, he had actually gained some foundation from early on due to her sister's influences, and now Izuku was going to continue to build upon this. And the first place that Izuku would go in order to make sure that his strength was all the way would be Dagobah Beach. This would be when the 10 months of training would begin. And that is basically it for right now, Time Clan. I know this is on the shorter side compared to what you guys are used to, but it's like, hey, I'm probably going to start making shorter videos from now on. Mainly to like actually be more motivated to upload, especially now when I'm starting to get ready for college and all that. And like, yeah, I just don't see myself making these very long videos as much as I used to. But I guess we'll have to wait until sometime. Let's see how this will work. It's your boy Kintai next signing out. You guys already know the deal because I already told you guys in the beginning. But beyond that, peace.